On Christmas Eve, I sat handcuffed in the back of a patrol car, my cheek still stinging from my stepmother's slap, through the frosted window. I watched my father stand on the porch, arms crossed against the cold, telling the officer that I was the one who attacked his wife. He had no idea that behind me, the dashcam on my truck was blinking red, having recorded every single lie she told and every blow she struck. My name is Riley Hargrove, and 32 years of being a diligent daughter evaporated into the freezing air of a Riverton, Ohio winter night in the span of 10 minutes. I sat on the hard plastic bench of the patrol cruiser, the material cold enough to bite through the denim of my jeans. My hands were cuffed behind my back, the steel ratcheted tight enough to pinch the skin around my wrists, forcing my shoulders into an unnatural, painful arch. Outside the window, the world was awash in the chaotic strobe of red and blue lights. They cut through the darkness, illuminating the falling snow that dusted the dead grass of my father's front lawn. It was the kind of picturesque snowfall you saw on greeting cards, soft and silent, completely at odds with the metallic taste of blood pooling in my mouth. I ran my tongue over my lower lip. It was split. The copper tang was the only thing keeping me grounded, a sharp reminder that this was actually happening. I was not having a nightmare. I was sitting in the back of a police car in the driveway where I had learned to ride a bike, arrested for assault. Through the reinforced glass, I watched them. Lydia, my stepmother, was performing the role of her life. She stood on the porch, wrapped in an oversized beige cardigan that she pulled tight around herself to emphasize her fragility. Her face was buried in the crook of my father's shoulder. She was shaking, her body convulsing with what looked like sobbing. But I knew better. I knew that if you got close enough, her eyes would be dry and sharp. One of her hands clutched her cheek. The skin there flushed a theatrical red. "She tried to kill me, Thomas," she wailed, her voice muffled but loud enough to carry over the low hum of the police cruiser's idling engine. "She aimed the truck right at me, and when she missed, oh God, she just came at me like an animal." My father, Thomas, stood as still as a statue. He was wearing his old flannel jacket, the one I had bought him 3 Christmases ago, but he looked like a stranger. His face was gray, drained of color, his jaw set in a line so hard it looked like it might snap. He was not looking at the police car. He was not looking at me. He was staring at the officer taking notes, his arm wrapped protectively around Lydia. The officer, a young man named Officer Miller, who I had gone to high school with, a guy who used to copy my math homework, looked uncomfortable. He glanced from the sobbing woman to the silent man, his pen hovering over his notepad. "Mr. Hargrove," Miller asked, his voice professional but strained. "I need you to be clear on this. You are confirming that your daughter, Riley Hargrove, initiated the physical altercation? That she was the aggressor?" I held my breath. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. This was my dad, the man who taught me how to wire a breaker box, the man who sat by my bed when I had the flu. He knew me. He knew I did not have a violent bone in my body. He knew I spent my days managing construction crews, diffusing arguments between hot-headed electricians and drywallers without ever raising a hand. Thomas looked down at Lydia. She let out a fresh, high-pitched whimper and squeezed his arm. My father looked up, meeting Officer Miller's eyes. His own eyes were red-rimmed, tired, and terrifyingly cold. "I saw the end of it," Thomas said, his voice flat and heavy as a stone. "Riley was on top of her, my wife. Lydia did nothing wrong. She was just trying to protect herself." The air left my lungs. It felt like he had reached through the glass and punched me in the chest. He lied, or worse, he had convinced himself of the lie so completely that he could sell it to the law without blinking. I wanted to scream. I wanted to thrash against the door and yell that he was blind, that she had played him like a fiddle, that he was throwing his only child to the wolves for a woman who viewed him as a retirement plan. The scream built up in my throat, hot and acidic. "Don't say a word." The voice in my head sounded like the defense attorney from that crime drama I binge-watched on lonely nights in my apartment. Shut up. Riley, anything you say can and will be used against you. If you scream, you look like the crazy person she is painting you to be. If you fight, you are resisting arrest. Sit still. Be ice. I bit down on my injured lip, hard enough to start the bleeding again. The pain gave me focus. I forced my face into a mask of stone. I would not give them the satisfaction of a tear, not one. I turned my head away from the porch, looking toward the street. The neighbors had come out. Of course they had. In a town like Riverton, a police car in a driveway on Christmas Eve was better entertainment than the cable television. Mrs. Gable from across the street was standing in her bathrobe, holding her phone up horizontally. The flash was on. She was recording. Next to her, the teenage boy from the corner house was doing the same. Tomorrow morning, this would be all over the local Facebook groups. The Hargrove girl finally snapped. Did you see the blood? Disgraceful. I closed my eyes, and the memory of what had actually happened 5 minutes ago assaulted me, vivid and violent. Flashback. It was the wind. That was the first thing I remembered. The biting wind cutting across the driveway as I stood by the open door of my pickup truck. The engine was still running, the heater blasting, creating a low rumble that vibrated through the chassis. Lydia stood between me and the house, blocking my path. Her face was not tear-stained then. It was twisted in a sneer that distorted her carefully applied makeup. "You think you are so smart," she had hissed, stepping into my personal space. "You think because you have a degree and a little money you can come in here and dictate how we live?" "I am trying to stop you from robbing him blind, Lydia," I had said, my voice steady, my hands open and visible. I was an engineer. I dealt in facts. I saw the draft of the new will. I know about the advisor fees. That was the trigger. The mention of the money stripped away her mask entirely. She lunged. It happened so fast I barely had time to react. Her fingers, tipped with manicured nails, tangled into my hair. She yanked my head down with shocking strength. I stumbled, my boot slipping on a patch of ice. "You ungrateful little brat!" she screamed. Her other hand connected with my face. Slap. A ring on her finger tore the skin of my lip. The sting was blinding. "Lydia, stop!" I yelled, throwing my hands up to shield my face. I did not hit back. I knew better than to escalate. I just wanted to get away. She didn't stop. She shoved me backward, hard. I collided with the front grille of my truck, the metal digging into my lower back. She came at me again, her hands clawing, slapping, tearing at my jacket. "Help!" she started screaming, her voice changing pitch instantly. "Help! She is killing me!" It was psychotic. She was clawing at her own face now, messing up her own hair, while simultaneously kicking at my shins. Then the front door opened. Lydia threw herself backward onto the paved driveway, landing in a heap of snow and gravel. She sprawled out, wailing, looking for all the world like a victim who had just been shoved. My father ran out in his socks. He saw me standing by the truck, hands raised in defense. He saw her on the ground. He did not ask. He just roared my name. End flashback. The heavy thud of the cruiser's back door opening jerked me back to the present. Officer Miller leaned in. He didn't look me in the eye. "Riley Hargrove," he recited, his breath puffing out in white clouds. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you." His voice was a monotone drone, practiced and detached, but underneath his words, I heard something else. From the church 2 blocks over, the midnight mass bells began to toll. They were playing a hymn, "Joy to the World." The bright, metallic chimes rang out clear and crisp across the snowy neighborhood. Joy to the world. The Lord is come. The irony was so thick it nearly choked me. There was no joy here, just the cold steel of handcuffs and the absolute shattering of my family. Officer Miller slammed the door shut, sealing me inside the cage. The sound was final, a heavy thunk that separated me from the rest of the world. He walked back around to the driver's seat. Through the partition, I watched him get in and pick up his radio. I shifted my weight, trying to relieve the pressure on my shoulders. As I moved, my line of sight adjusted. I looked past the wire mesh, past the officer's head, and out through the front windshield of the cruiser. Directly in front of us, parked haphazardly in the driveway where Lydia had forced me to stop, sat my pickup truck. It was a heavy-duty Ford, built for construction sites and long hauls. It was covered in road salt and grime. The engine was still idling. In the chaos, no one had thought to tell me to turn it off. The headlights cut twin beams through the falling snow. And there, centered on the windshield, tucked discreetly behind the rearview mirror, was a small black device. It was my Dashcam. I had installed it 6 months ago after a close call with an insurance scammer on the highway. It was a high-end model, one that recorded in 4K resolution with clear audio. It had a wide-angle lens that captured everything in front of the hood, and everything immediately to the sides of the fenders. A tiny rhythmic red light was blinking on the side of the device. Blink, blink, blink. It was recording. It was still recording. Lydia and my father were standing directly in its field of view right now, but more importantly, 10 minutes ago, the entire altercation had happened right on the hood, dead center in the frame. The camera had seen Lydia lunge. The camera had heard her threats. The camera had recorded her clawing at herself. The camera had captured the exact moment she threw herself on the ground and started screaming for help before my father even opened the door. It had audio. It heard me begging her to stop. It heard the slap. Officer Miller put the cruiser into gear. The car lurched forward, tires crunching on the snow. As we backed out of the driveway, I kept my eyes locked on that tiny blinking light until the angle became too steep and my truck disappeared from view. Nobody had looked at the truck. Lydia was too busy acting. Dad was too busy being the protective husband. The police were too focused on the aggressor in the back seat. A cold, hard knot of satisfaction began to tighten in my stomach, replacing the nausea. It was not happiness. It was something darker, sharper. It was the feeling of holding the ace of spades when everyone else thinks you have folded. I leaned my head back against the seat. My lip throbbed in time with my heartbeat. Let them take me to the station. Let them book me. Let Lydia tell her sob story to every officer in the precinct. Let my father sleep in that house tonight, thinking he had done the righteous thing by protecting his wife from his unstable daughter. If Dad wants to believe her that badly, fine. I watched the familiar streets of Riverton blur past, distorted by the snow and the speed. Let us see how much of a stand he can take when he sees the unedited footage. 3 weeks before I found myself handcuffed in the back of a police cruiser. The biggest problem in my life was a blown transformer at a data center project in downtown Columbus. My life back then was measured in schematics, load calculations, and the satisfying weight of a hard hat. I am a project manager and electrical engineer for Blue Harbor Systems. We specialize in the unsexy but critical infrastructure that keeps the modern world humming: industrial retrofits, server farms, massive HVAC integrations. I spent 12 hours a day surrounded by men who smelled like drywall dust, stale coffee, and honest sweat. They were rough around the edges. Sure, they cursed when a cable snapped and spat on the ground, but I understood them. If a foreman told me a circuit was dead, it was dead. If they said they would be there at 6 in the morning, they were there at 5:45. There was no subtext on a construction site. My family life in Riverton, however, was nothing but subtext. I lived about 70 minutes away from my childhood home, a distance I had calculated carefully. It was close enough to drive down for Sunday dinner if guilt tripped me hard enough, but far enough that I could not be summoned for every little clogged drain or flickering porch light. I liked my apartment. It was quiet. It was clean. It was mine. I had no husband, no kids, and according to my stepmother, no prospects. "You are married to that truck of yours," Lydia would say, usually while swirling a glass of Chardonnay that I had essentially paid for. My father, Thomas, owned Tom's Corner Garage. It was a staple in Riverton, the kind of place that still smelled of old oil, rubber tires, and Gojo hand cleaner. He had built it from the ground up, wrench by wrench. When my mother was alive, the garage was our second home. She did the books in the back office while I did my homework on a stack of radial tires. But Mom passed away from an aneurysm when I was 24. It was sudden, brutal, and it left a hole in Thomas Hargrove that he did not know how to fill with anything but work. Then, 3 years later, he found Lydia. She was 10 years younger than him, a former receptionist at a high-end salon in the next town over. She was polished, petite, and possessed a voice that could sound like honey while saying things that tasted like vinegar. There was never any abuse. She never raised a hand to me when I was younger, mostly because I was already a grown woman living on my own when she moved in, but the displacement was immediate and absolute. Whatever trace of my mother existed in that house was slowly boxed up, painted over, or donated. The garage, once a place of grease and grit, started getting aesthetic touches that made no sense, like potted ferns in the waiting room that died within a week from the fumes. And then there was Carissa. Lydia had a daughter from a previous marriage, 2 years older than me. Carissa lived in Florida, worked in marketing, and was everything I was not. She was blonde, bubbly, and seemingly helpless. She never visited. It was always too expensive or she was too busy. But she was omnipresent via FaceTime. I cannot count the number of times I would be over for dinner, exhausted from a 60-hour work week, only to have Dad hold up the iPad so I could wave to Carissa. "Hi, Riley," she would chirp, her face pixelated but glowing. "Oh my God, you look so tired. Does that helmet mash your hair down all day? I could never do that." Then she would turn her attention to my father. "Dad, I miss you so much. The car is making that funny noise again. I wish you were here to listen to it. Nobody explains things as safely as you do." She called him Dad. She had a father of her own somewhere in Ohio, but she called my father Dad, and every time she did, I saw Thomas melt a little. He was a simple man who wanted to feel needed, and while I was fixing my own flat tires and wiring my own house, Carissa was offering him the chance to be the hero. The irony, of course, was that while Carissa offered him emotional validation, I was the one keeping the roof over his head. The garage had struggled in the last 5 years. Modern cars are computers on wheels, and the equipment needed to service them costs a fortune. Dad was old school. He fell behind. 2 years ago, when the landlord of the garage property threatened eviction over 6 months of back rent, I wrote a check for $18,000. I told Dad it was a loan, but we both knew he would never pay it back. Last year, when he needed the new Snap-on diagnostic tablet to stay competitive, I put the $7,000 on my corporate rewards card and paid it off myself. And just last Christmas, when Lydia insisted the shop looked dingy and drove customers away, I transferred $20,000 to my father's account. It was my entire year-end bonus plus savings. It was supposed to be for a new roof and signage. Instead, I came home to find the waiting room had been remodeled with expensive leather chairs and a cappuccino machine, while the roof over the service bay still leaked into a bucket every time it rained. Customers care about the experience, Riley. Lydia had lectured me when I pointed out the water damage. You deal with machines, I deal with people. Trust me on this. Dad had stood there, wiping his hands on a rag, looking from me to her. He gave that weak, apologetic smile that had become his trademark. Lydia has a point, kiddo. It looks real nice in here now. Classy? That was the dynamic. I was the wallet. Lydia was the decorator. I was the mechanic who kept the engine running. Carissa was the hood ornament. I felt like a tenant in the house I grew up in, a useful resource but socially awkward guest. It worries me. Tom, I heard Lydia say once when she thought I was in the bathroom. A girl her age, always in those heavy boots, standing around men in a construction zone. It hardens a woman. No wonder she is still single. Men want someone soft, someone who needs them. I had walked out, flushed the toilet loudly to let them know I was there, and left without saying goodbye. I did not go back for a month. But family is a gravity well. You can orbit as far out as you want, but eventually, you get pulled back in. The call came on a Tuesday night in early December. The snow had just started sticking to the roads. I was in my apartment, reviewing blueprints for a hospital expansion, when Dad's name popped up on my phone. "Hey, kiddo." He sounded breathless, excited. "You got a minute?" "For you? Always," I said, putting down my pen. "Is everything okay? Is the furnace acting up again?" No, nothing like that. Better. Listen, Lydia and well, mostly Lydia. She has been doing some networking. She found this group, Highway Crown Automotive. Have you heard of them? I frowned. The chain? Yeah. They buy up independent shops and turn them into assembly line oil change places. Why? They want to buy me out. Riley, he said, and I could hear the hope in his voice. It broke my heart a little. They want to buy the garage, expand it, put in 4 new bays, and here's the kicker. They want to keep me on as a manager for 3 years, then I can retire, fully retire. I sat up straight. My engineer brain instantly started looking for the cracks in the foundation. Dad, Highway Crown is a shark. They don't just hand out golden parachutes to small-town mechanics. Did they send a contract? They did. Lydia's voice chimed in. She was on speakerphone. Of course she was. It is a standard acquisition contract. Riley, very generous, but your father is being stubborn. He says he won't sign anything until his genius engineer daughter looks at the fine print. There was a tone in her voice, a mix of flattery and annoyance. She wanted the deal done, but she knew she could not bypass me without making Thomas suspicious. I am not a lawyer, Lydia, I said, keeping my voice neutral. But you read contracts for those skyscrapers you build, don't you? Dad asked. I trust you, Riley. I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything. It looks like a lot of money. Honey, enough for me to finally rest. Enough to maybe buy that lake house your mother always wanted. That low blow, using Mom's dream to sell Lydia's scheme, stung. But I knew it came from him, not her. He was tired. His back hurt. He had been changing oil and rotating tires for 40 years. He deserved a rest. Okay, I sighed, rubbing my temples. Send it over. Actually, Lydia interrupted, we were hoping you could come down for a few days. The reps want to meet this weekend to finalize things before the holiday break. Plus, we haven't seen you. I am making my famous pot roast. I hesitated. My gut told me to stay away. The project at Blue Harbor was entering a critical phase. I had a life. I had boundaries. But then I imagined my father sitting at that kitchen table, squinting at legal jargon he did not understand, with Lydia whispering in one ear and a corporate shark smiling in the other. I had bailed him out of debt. I had bought his equipment. I had paid for his bad renovations. I couldn't let him sign away his life's work for pennies on the dollar just because I didn't want to drive an hour in the snow. I will be there Friday afternoon, I said. Great, Lydia said, her voice brightening artificially. Drive safe. The roads are slippery. I hung up and looked at my empty apartment. I felt a heavy sense of foreboding, the kind you get when the barometer drops before a storm. I packed my bag, I grabbed my laptop, and before I left on Friday, almost as an afterthought, I checked the memory card in my truck's dashcam. It was a habit from the job site, verifying equipment. I reformatted the card to ensure it had plenty of space. I thought I was going home to read a contract. I thought I was going home to save my father from a bad business deal. I had no idea I was driving straight into an ambush that would end with my face slammed against the hood of that very truck. I pulled out of my complex, the tires crunching on the salt, and headed toward Riverton. The dashcam chimed as it started recording. A tiny red eye, watching the road ahead, oblivious to the fact that the real danger wasn't on the highway, but waiting for me in the driveway of the house where I was born. I pulled my truck into the familiar gravel driveway of the house I grew up in, the tires crunching loudly in the quiet afternoon air. It was a gray, overcast Friday in Riverton, the kind of weather that made everything look flat and washed out. I shifted the heavy Ford into park and let the engine idle for a second, listening to the rhythmic chug of the diesel. It was a sound that usually calmed me, a reminder of work, of structure, of things that made sense. Above me, attached to the windshield, My dashcam let out a soft electronic chime as it saved the current clip. I barely noticed it. It was just part of my routine. I installed the camera 6 months ago because I spent 90% of my life on highways traveling between construction sites, and I had seen enough accidents to know that memory is unreliable. But video is fact. I checked the little red light to make sure it was in standby mode, grabbed my duffel bag from the passenger seat, and stepped out into the biting cold. The front door opened before I even reached the porch steps. Lydia was there, framed by the warm yellow light of the hallway, wearing an apron that looked perfectly spotless, as if she had put it on just for this moment. "Riley!" she exclaimed, her voice pitching up a full octave. She hurried out and wrapped me in a hug that smelled of expensive vanilla perfume and hairspray. It was a squeeze that felt more like a containment measure than an embrace. "Look at you. You look like you have been working hard." She pulled back, her eyes scanning my Carhartt jacket and the steel-toed boots I had not bothered to change out of. "I came straight from the site, Lydia," I said, forcing a smile. "Good to see you." Come in. She ushered me inside, the heat of the house hitting my face. "I made waffles. I know it is past lunch, but I thought you might want something comforting. You always look so thin." I followed her into the kitchen. It had been repainted again. The warm oak cabinets my mother had picked out 20 years ago were now a stark, sterile white. "You know," Lydia said, pouring batter onto the iron, "I was just talking to Carissa this morning. She just got a promotion at her marketing firm. Huge raise, but she still manages to teach that Pilates class 3 times a week," I told her. "Carissa, I wish Riley could find that balance. You are so dedicated, but I worry you are a little obsessed with work. Honey, it is not healthy for a woman to be so stressed all the time." I sat at the island, my hands folded on the cold granite counter. "I enjoy my work, Lydia, and it pays the bills." "Oh, I know. She waved a spatula dismissively. "But money isn't everything. Happiness is about family, about time." My father walked in then, wiping grease from his hands with a red shop rag. He looked older than I remembered. His shoulders slumped, the lines around his eyes deeper, but his face lit up when he saw me. "There she is," he said, coming over to kiss the top of my head. "My master builder. Thanks for coming down." "Riley." "Hey, Dad." I leaned into him, smelling the familiar mix of oil and Old Spice. "I heard you have some paperwork for me." "Right to business," Lydia chimed in, setting a plate of waffles in front of me with a little too much force. "Let the girl eat, Thomas. But yes, the papers are on the dining table." I ate the waffles quickly, mostly to avoid conversation, and then we moved to the dining room. A thick manila envelope sat in the center of the table like a centerpiece. Thomas sat opposite me, looking nervous. Lydia hovered behind him, her hand resting possessively on his shoulder. I pulled out the document. The header read, "Acquisition Agreement, Highway Crown Automotive Group." I put on my reading glasses and started to read. The room was silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock. As I turned the pages, the knot in my stomach tightened. This was not a retirement plan. It was a surrender. "Dad," I said, looking up after 20 minutes, "have you actually read this? I mean, really read the clauses?" "Well, the representative walked us through the highlights," Thomas said, shifting in his chair. "The highlights are missing a lot of shadows," I said, flipping to page 12. "First of all, the purchase price. They are offering you $350,000 for the business, the client list, and the real estate. Dad, the land alone is worth nearly that much. With the equipment I bought you last year, you are basically giving them the business for free." "It is a fair market offer," Lydia interrupted smoothly. "The market is down. Riley, you know that." "The construction market is down," I corrected her. "Auto repair is recession-proof. But that is not even the worst part. Look at Clause 4A. Seller agrees to remain as site manager for a period of 36 months post-closing to ensure transition. Dad, that means you are not retiring. You are becoming their employee for 3 years. And if you quit, you forfeit 20% of the payout. Thomas blinked, pulling the paper closer. They said that was just a formality, to keep the customers happy. It is a trap, I said bluntly. You will be working for a corporate manager who is 25 years old, following their rules, in your own shop. You will hate it. And what about this? I pointed to a paragraph near the end. Clause 12C. Entity agrees to retain Lydia Hargrove as brand image consultant for a retainer of $2,000 a month for the duration of the transition. Brand image consultant? For a mechanic shop? Lydia stood up straighter, her chin lifting. They value my input. Riley, I have made a lot of changes to the shop's aesthetic. They want to keep that vibe. They are buying your cooperation. Lydia, I said, keeping my voice level. They are paying you a salary to make sure Dad signs a bad deal. That is enough, Lydia snapped, her mask slipping for a fraction of a second. You come in here with your big city attitude and try to pick apart a blessing. We are not young like you. Riley, we want to rest. Your father wants to buy that house by the lake. You remember? The one he always talked about? I looked at my father. He was staring at his hands. It would be nice, Riley, he murmured, to wake up and see the water. I want you to have the lake house, Dad, I said softly. But this contract isn't the way to get it. They are fleecing you. The tension at dinner was thick enough to cut with a knife. Lydia had recovered her composure and was now playing the role of the martyr. She pushed peas around her plate and sighed periodically. We were going to save this for Christmas morning, Lydia said suddenly, breaking a long silence. But since we are talking about finances and futures, Thomas, maybe you should tell her. My father cleared his throat. He looked reluctant. We updated the wills last week. Riley? I paused, my fork halfway to my mouth. Oh, you didn't mention that. It was time, Lydia said, smiling sweetly. We wanted to make sure everything was fair. Thomas and I decided that, God forbid something happens to us, the estate should be divided equally between you and Carissa. I froze. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Carissa? I repeated. But Carissa is not your daughter, Dad. She is my daughter in spirit, Lydia said quickly, her hand squeezing my father's forearm. She calls him Dad. She loves him, and we are a family now. It is only right that sisters share equally. That is what family does. I looked at my father, waiting for him to speak, to say that his business, the house my mother helped pay for, the legacy of the Hargrove name, should go to his blood, or at least be distributed with some logic, but he just nodded, looking tired and beaten down. It seemed like the fair thing to do, honey, he said weakly. Lydia says it will prevent any arguments later. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. This was not about fairness. This was a systematic liquidation of my place in this family. First, sell the business so there is liquid cash. Then, ensure half of that cash goes to Lydia's daughter. I was being diluted. I see, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. That is very generous of you, Dad. After dinner, I helped clear the table. I carried a stack of plates into the kitchen, moving silently in my socks. I heard Lydia's voice coming from the pantry. She was whispering, urgent and hushed. No, he is wavering. She is picking apart the contract. I told you she would be a problem. I stopped just outside the doorway, holding my breath. I know, Lydia hissed. We need to get it signed before the 25th. If she drags this out to a lawyer review, we lose the window. I am handling it. Just make sure the paperwork on your end is ready. I took a step closer, peering through the crack in the door hinge. Lydia was holding her phone to her ear, her back to me, on the screen, which was pulled away slightly from her face. I saw the contact name glowing in white letters against a black background. CG Advisor. She hung up abruptly and turned. I stepped back quickly, rattling the plates intentionally as I walked into the room. Who were you talking to? I asked, keeping my face blank. Lydia jumped, clutching her chest. Jesus, Riley, you scared me. It was just the caterer for the Christmas party. They are running late. On a Friday night? I asked. They are very busy, she said, her eyes darting away. I am going to check on your father. She brushed past me, smelling of fear and vanilla. C.G. Advisor. The name meant nothing to me, but the tone of the conversation meant everything. She wasn't planning a party. She was coordinating a strike. That night, I lay in the twin bed of my old room. The walls had been stripped of my old posters and painted a neutral beige. It felt like a guest room in a stranger's house. The heating vents in this old house carried sound efficiently. Around 11 o'clock, I heard their voices drifting from the master bedroom down the hall. Just sign it, Thomas. Lydia's voice was whining, pleading. Why do we have to wait for her approval? She is jealous. Can't you see that? She is jealous that we are happy and she is alone. She is not jealous. Liddy. My father's voice was a low rumble. She is smart. She pointed out some real issues with that liability clause. If I am stuck working there for 3 years... Oh, stop it, Lydia snapped. You are letting her control you. Who takes care of you? Thomas? Who cooks your meals? Who makes sure you take your heart medication? Me? Not her. She comes here once a year and acts like she owns the place. If you love me, you will sign that paper so we can start our life. I don't want to drag this into the new year. I just want to sleep on it, Dad said. I want to ask her about the tax implications tomorrow. You always pick her side, Lydia said, her voice turning cold and venomous. One day, you are going to have to choose, Thomas, your wife, or your critic. I stared up at the dark ceiling, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I was not a daughter to her. I was not even a stepdaughter. I was an obstacle, a speed bump on the road to a payout. I sat up and reached for my laptop bag. I pulled out my MacBook and opened it, the screen casting a pale blue glow over the sheets. I opened a new document. I did not title it Family. I titled it Garage, Risk Assessment. I began to type, my fingers flying over the keys. Fact 1. Highway Crown offer is 40% below market value. Fact 2. Lydia is guaranteed a consultancy position, essentially a bribe. Fact 3 will modify to include non-biological heir, Carissa, immediately prior to sale. Fact 4. Secret communication with CG advisor regarding timeline pressure. Fact 5. Emotional manipulation of Thomas Hargrove regarding health and retirement. I looked at the list. It looked like the breakdown of a failing project, the kind where you know the structural integrity is compromised and the whole building is going to come down. I was not here to celebrate Christmas. I was here to stop a demolition. I closed the laptop, the snap echoing in the empty room. I had to be careful. If I pushed too hard, Lydia would make good on her threat and force Dad to choose. And looking at how frail and tired he was, I was terrified that he might choose the path of least resistance, even if it led him off a cliff. I needed more information on CG Advisor, and I needed to make sure that whatever happened next, I had a record of it, because in this house, the truth was being rewritten every hour. Saturday morning broke with a deceptive brightness. The sun reflected off the snow, creating a blinding glare that masked the storm brewing inside the house. I came downstairs to find Lydia already in motion. She was humming a holiday tune, pulling boxes of decorations from the hall closet. Morning, sleepyhead, she chirped. I thought we could bond a little today. Your father is at the shop handling a few last-minute customers. It is just us girls. Help me with the garlands? I grabbed a cup of black coffee and nodded. Sure, just tell me where you want them. As we draped fake pine boughs over the banister, Lydia started talking about security. Oh, by the way, she said, adjusting a red bow. Don't mind the new cameras. I had a system installed last week. We have had some package thefts in the neighborhood. She pointed to a sleek white dome mounted in the corner of the living room ceiling. And I put 2 in the garage, with all the tools your father has. I was worried about break-ins. Better safe than sorry, right? Smart, I said. Though the placement of the living room camera felt odd, It was angled to cover the entire seating area, almost like a stage. Her phone rang then, a sharp, jarring tone. She glanced at the screen and her smile tightened. "I need to take this. It is the florist for the centerpieces. Be a dear and finish the mantel." She walked away, heading toward my father's home office at the back of the house. I watched her go. The moment she turned the corner, I stopped arranging the garland. I moved silently across the carpet, stopping just at the base of the stairs, near the open door of the office. The floorboards in this house creaked, but I knew every silent spot. I stood perfectly still. "I told you not to call the house line." Lydia's voice was muffled but audible. She had not closed the door all the way. "Yes, he is on board. We just need to get past this weekend." Pause. "Don't worry about her," Lydia said, her tone dropping lower, colder. "She is asking questions, but she is leaving on Monday. Once Thomas signs the sale agreement and the will is notarized, the trap is set. Her share will be locked into that trust fund structure we discussed." I pressed my back against the wall, my breath hitching in my throat. "Trust fund?" "Exactly," Lydia continued, a cruel amusement creeping into her voice. "The Family Preservation Trust sounds noble, doesn't it? But with the competency clause regarding managing assets, well, Carissa and I will breathe a lot easier knowing Riley can't touch the principal without approval. She thinks she is so independent. Let us see how independent she is when she has to ask for permission to buy a wrench." My hands clenched into fists at my sides. It wasn't just about cutting my inheritance. It was about infantilizing me, controlling me. She wanted to turn me into a child who had to beg for allowance. Footsteps approached the door. I moved quickly, darting back to the fireplace and grabbing a strand of lights just as Lydia emerged. "Sorry about that," she said, her face a mask of pleasantry. "Florists are so dramatic during the holidays. They ran out of poinsettias." "Tragic," I said, not looking up. "I think this strand is dead. I am going to check the breaker box in the basement." "Okay, honey." I went to the basement, but not to check a breaker. I went to calm down. I paced the concrete floor, my mind racing. She was confident, too confident. That meant the paperwork was already drawn up. I waited until Lydia went upstairs to shower before I made my move. I slipped into my father's office. It smelled of old paper and stale cigar smoke. I went straight to the filing cabinet. It was locked, but the key was in the top drawer of the desk, under a tray of pens, where Dad had kept it since 1995. I opened the bottom drawer labeled Current. There it was, a thick envelope with the letterhead of Baker & Lowell Legal Group. I pulled out the document titled Last Will and Testament of Thomas Hargrove, Draft V3. I skipped the standard preamble and went straight to the distribution of assets. It looked standard at first glance, 50-50 split of the residual estate. But then I found the addendum she had mentioned. Article 5, Section B, Preservation of Assets. In the event that a beneficiary is deemed to be engaged in high-risk employment or demonstrates financial instability, their portion of the estate shall be placed in the Family Preservation Trust, to be overseen by the appointed family financial advisor. And there, at the bottom of the page, defined in bold text, Appointed Family Financial Advisor, Lydia Hargrove. It was a masterclass in legal manipulation. My job, construction management, could easily be defined as high-risk employment. She had built a loophole big enough to drive a truck through, and she held the keys. If Dad died, she would control every cent he left me. I took a picture of the page with my phone, shoved the document back into the envelope, locked the cabinet, and replaced the key. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a cold, hard rage. That evening, the atmosphere in the house was surreal. Dad was back, tired but happy to have his girls under one roof. We sat in the dining room eating takeout pizza. "Let's call Carissa," Lydia announced, propping her iPad up against a napkin holder. She wanted to show you her new apartment layout. While the FaceTime call connected, I stood up. "I left my phone in the car," I lied. I will be right back. I walked to the kitchen counter, where my phone was actually sitting, hidden behind a fruit bowl. I tapped the screen, opened the voice recorder app, hit the red button, and left it there. Screen down. Go ahead without me, I called out. I need to grab my charger too. I walked out the back door into the cold night air. I stood on the patio, counting to 300, 5 minutes, enough time for pleasantries to fade and truth to emerge. When I walked back in, Carissa was laughing on the screen. Oh, Dad, you are so funny, she was saying. I miss you guys. Riley went to get her charger, Lydia said, her voice dropping slightly. She is prowling around. You know how she gets, suspicious of everything. I stayed in the mudroom, out of sight. Is she still giving you grief about the contract? Carissa asked. Her voice was sharp, lacking the sweetness she used with Dad. She is trying, Lydia said. But don't worry, if everything goes to plan, this Christmas will be the last time I have to tolerate her staring down her nose at me. Your father is starting to see it. Carissa, he is starting to see how unstable she is. Unstable? Carissa giggled. That is a strong word. Is it? Lydia's voice was low, conspiratorial. She is aggressive. She is stressed. And if she were to, I don't know, cause a scene, snap under the pressure, your father would be devastated. He would realize that for everyone's safety, maybe it is best if he keeps his distance. He would need us to protect him. My blood ran cold. 'Cause a scene? Snap? Just make sure you don't push her too hard too fast. Mom, Carissa said, we need the signature first. I know what I'm doing, Lydia replied. I am just setting the stage. By Monday, she will be the villain of this story, and we will be the ones picking up the pieces. I heard footsteps approaching the mudroom. I quickly opened the back door and slammed it shut, pretending I had just come in from outside. I walked into the kitchen, grabbed my phone from behind the fruit bowl, and slid it into my pocket. Found it, I said, walking into the dining room. Hi, Carissa. Hi, Riley, Carissa beamed. We were just talking about how much we love the new decorations. They are lovely, I said, my voice flat. I am actually feeling a headache coming on. I think I'm going to turn in early. Oh, poor thing, Lydia said, her eyes glinting. Rest up. Tomorrow is a big day. I went upstairs, locked my bedroom door, and sat on the edge of the bed. I plugged my headphones into my phone and played back the recording. This Christmas will be the last time I have to tolerate her. If she were to, cause a scene. By Monday, she will be the villain. I listened to it 3 times. The static hiss of the recording made their voices sound ghostly, but the intent was crystal clear. Lydia wasn't just planning to steal my inheritance. She was planning to provoke me. She wanted an explosion. She wanted to prove to my father that I was dangerous, unstable, aggressive. She wanted to break the bond between us so completely that he would hand her the keys to the kingdom just to keep me away. I looked at myself in the mirror above the dresser. My face was pale, my eyes dark with exhaustion, but beneath the fatigue, something else was taking shape. The confusion was gone. The hurt was hardening into strategy. I was an engineer. I fixed broken systems. I reinforced weak structures. And I demolished things that were beyond repair. You want a villain, Lydia? I whispered to the empty room. Fine, but you better make sure you don't get caught in the blast radius. I saved the file as evidence.01 and uploaded it to my cloud storage. Then I opened my laptop and began to type out a timeline. If she wanted to provoke a reaction, I needed to know exactly when and where the blow was coming, and I needed to make sure that when she struck, I wasn't the only one watching. The tension in the house had been building for 3 days, like gas filling a sealed room, waiting for a spark. That spark finally came on Tuesday afternoon, disguised as a mundane errand. Riley, be a dear and drive me to the bank, Lydia said, coming down the stairs in her pristine white coat. My car is boxed in by the delivery truck next door. And your father needs the deposit for the garage account transferred before 2 o'clock. It is urgent. I looked up from my laptop. I had been planning to leave that evening, to escape back to my apartment and my sanity. But the mention of the garage account stopped me. If I was going to protect my father's assets, I needed to know where the money was going. "Fine," I said, closing the lid. "Let me grab my keys." "We will take your truck," Lydia insisted, her voice tight. "You handle that monster better than I do, and the roads are still icy. I feel safer with you driving." It was a strange request. Lydia hated my truck. She called it the Beast, and usually refused to be seen in it. But I did not argue. I just wanted to get this over with. The drive to the bank was quiet, a tense silence filled only by the hum of the heater and the rumble of the diesel engine. But on the way back, the dam broke. Lydia shifted in the passenger seat, turning her body toward me. "You know, Riley, I have been thinking about what you said regarding the will." I kept my eyes on the road. "There is nothing to think about. Lydia, it is a bad deal for Dad." "Is it?" she asked, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "Or is it just a bad deal for you? You are so terrified of losing your slice of the pie, aren't you?" "I don't care about the money," I said, gripping the steering wheel tighter. "I care about him being exploited." "Exploited?" She laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "You are the one exploiting him. Riley, holding your little financial bailouts over his head like a weapon. Look at me. I paid the rent. I bought the scanner." "You do it to make him feel small, to make yourself feel important because you know, deep down, you are alone. You have no one." I felt a flush of heat rise up my neck. "That is not true." "It is," she pressed on, leaning closer. "Look at you, 32 years old, no husband, no kids, just a job where you pretend to be a man in a hard hat. If the construction market crashes tomorrow, what do you have? Nothing. That is why you are jealous of Carissa. She knows how to be a woman. She knows how to let a man take care of her. She deserves an equal share because she brings joy to this family. You just bring stress." "Stop it," I said, my voice low. "You are going to regret this, Riley," she hissed as we turned onto our street. "When the new will is signed, and it will be signed, you are going to wish you had just played nice. You could have had a family. Instead, you are going to be the estranged daughter who visits once a year." I pulled the truck into the driveway, my heart hammering against my ribs. I just wanted her out of my cab. I wanted her out of my life. I slowed down, preparing to park near the garage door. "Stop!" Lydia suddenly shrieked, reaching over and yanking the emergency brake. The truck skidded slightly on the gravel, coming to a jarring halt about 20 feet from the house. The engine was still roaring, the dashboard lights flickering from the sudden stop. "What are you doing?" I yelled, putting the gear into park. "You could have ruined the transmission." "Get out," she demanded, unbuckling her seatbelt. "I am not finishing this conversation in here. I want to look you in the eye." She threw her door open and marched around to the front of the truck. I sat there for a second, stunned by her erratic behavior. Then, fueled by 3 days of suppressed anger, I opened my door and stepped out. I walked around to the front. We stood on the paved section of the driveway, directly in front of the massive chrome grille of my Ford. The engine was idling loudly behind me, a steady, rhythmic chug. The cold wind whipped my hair across my face, stinging my cheeks. Lydia stood with her back to the house, facing me, but as I stepped closer, she pivoted slightly, angling herself so that anyone looking out the front window would see her profile. "I have had it with you," she started screaming. Her volume was shocking, aimed not at me, but at the house. "I have tried to be a mother to you. I have tried to love you, and you treat me like dirt. You treat your father like an idiot." "Lower your voice, Lydia," I said, trying to keep my cool. "The neighbors are going to hear you." "Let them hear," she yelled, throwing her hands up theatrically. "Let everyone know how cruel you are. You come into my house. You insult my daughter. You try to control your father's money. You are sick, Riley. You are a sick, selfish girl." Something inside me snapped, not into violence, but into cold, hard clarity. I know about CG advisor, I said. My voice was not loud, but it cut through her screaming like a knife. Lydia froze mid-gesture. Her eyes went wide. I know about the shell company, I continued, stepping a little closer. I know Carissa is the owner. I know you are funneling the consulting fees to her. And I know about the Baker and Lowell draft, where you appoint yourself as my financial guardian. The color drained from Lydia's face. The hysterical victim act vanished, replaced by pure, unadulterated panic. She looked at the house, then back at me. She realized her narrative was about to collapse. If I showed Thomas the proof, the sale was off, the will was dead, and she was out on the street. "You little spy," she whispered, her voice trembling with genuine rage now. "You went through my things?" "I protected my father," I said, "and I'm going to tell him everything tonight." "No," she snarled. "You won't." She lunged. It happened in a blur. One moment she was standing 3 feet away. The next she was on me. Her hand lashed out, her palm connecting hard with my left cheek. The sound of the slap cracked through the cold air. "You ruined everything," she screamed, swinging again. I raised my forearms to block her, stumbling back. Her second blow hit my wrist, her nails digging into my skin. She was possessed. A whirlwind of beige wool and manicured claws. She shoved me with both hands, hitting me square in the chest. I lost my footing on a patch of ice and fell backward, my spine colliding hard with the metal hood of my truck. The impact knocked the wind out of me. "Lydia, stop!" I gasped, sliding off the hood but keeping my hands up, palms open. "Don't do this!" She grabbed my collar, shaking me. "I will not let you destroy my life." Then, the front door of the house flew open. "Hey!" my father's voice roared from the porch. "What is going on out there?" The transformation was instantaneous. It was terrifying. Lydia let go of my collar. She looked at Thomas, then at me. A spark of calculation flashed in her eyes. She threw herself backward. She did not trip. She launched herself away from me, landing hard on her hip on the freezing concrete. She scrambled backward, crab-walking away from the truck, and let out a blood-curdling scream. "Help! Thomas, help me!" I stood there, panting, my cheek throbbing, my back aching from the impact with the truck. I stared down at her, bewildered. "She tried to hit me," Lydia wailed, pointing a shaking finger at the truck, then at me. "She tried to run me over, Thomas, and when I didn't move, she got out and she threw me down." My father was running down the steps now, moving faster than I had seen him move in years. He didn't look at the truck. He didn't check the distance. He just saw his wife on the ground and his daughter standing over her. "Riley!" he bellowed, his face twisting into a mask of horror and fury. He skidded to a stop next to Lydia, dropping to his knees to cradle her. "Dad, no," I started, my voice shaking. She is lying. She hit me." "Look at her, Thomas," Lydia sobbed, burying her face in his flannel shirt. "She is crazy. She was screaming about the money. She said she wished I was dead." Thomas looked up at me. His eyes were stranger's eyes. There was no recognition in them, no memory of the daughter who bought him his tools, who paid his rent. There was only disgust. "Get away from her," he growled. "Dad, please, just listen." I took a step forward. "I said get back," he screamed, shielding Lydia with his body. "You attacked her? In my driveway? Are you out of your mind?" "I didn't touch her," I yelled back, tears finally stinging my eyes. "She jumped. She is acting. Dad!" "She is bleeding." Thomas pointed to a small scrape on Lydia's hand, probably from when she threw herself on the concrete. "You hurt her. I saw you standing over her like a thug." I looked around wildly. The neighbors across the street were at their windows. Mrs. Gable was on her porch, phone in hand. The mailman had stopped his truck 3 houses down. Everyone was watching, and from their angle, it looked exactly like what Lydia said. The angry stepdaughter towering over the fallen, fragile wife. "I am calling the police," Thomas said, his voice trembling. He fumbled for his phone. "Dad, don't," I begged. "Please, look at me. It is Riley." "I don't know who you are right now," he spat, dialing 3 numbers. "Hello? Dispatch? I need a squad car at 402 Maple Avenue. My daughter, she just assaulted my wife. Yes, she is still here." I stood frozen. The wind bit through my jacket, but I couldn't feel the cold anymore. I felt numb. A profound, hollow emptiness opened up in my chest. My father, the man I was trying to save, was calling the police on me. He was holding the woman who was robbing him, and he was looking at me like I was a monster. In the distance, the faint wail of a siren began to rise, cutting through the winter silence. I looked at Lydia. She was still sobbing into Thomas's chest, but for a split second, she turned her head. Her eyes met mine. There were no tears in them, just a cold, hard victory. I sank down onto the bumper of my truck, burying my face in my hands. I was trapped. It was her word against mine. She had the bruises she gave herself. She had the witness who saw the aftermath. She had the motive she had planted in their minds all week. "How?" I whispered to myself, the vibration of the idling truck humming against my legs. "How do I fight this?" I sat there, defeated, waiting for the handcuffs. The engine of my Ford continued to rumble behind me, steady and unceasing, and completely forgotten in the chaos. On the windshield directly above my head, the tiny red light of the dashcam continued to blink. Blink, blink, blink. Recording the lie, recording the truth. If only I could remember it was there. The back of the police cruiser smelled of stale sweat and industrial cleaner. As Officer Miller finished writing in his notepad, he leaned out the window to address my father and Lydia. I strained against the hard plastic seat, trying to hear the words that would define my immediate future. "Mr. and Mrs. Hargrove," Miller said, his voice dropping to a professional, somber register. "Given the statement regarding the physical assault and the threat with a vehicle, we need to know how you want to proceed. Are you pressing charges?" Lydia sniffled, a sound that grated on my nerves like sandpaper. She was leaning heavily against my father, her hand clutching her chest as if holding a broken heart together. I don't know," she whimpered, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "She is family. I don't want to ruin her life, but I am scared. Thomas, did you see her eyes? She looked like she wanted to kill me." My father stiffened. He looked at the cruiser, his gaze passing right through the dark glass where I sat. He did not see his daughter. He saw a threat. "We have to protect ourselves, Liddy," Thomas said, his voice cracking with a mixture of grief and resolve. He turned to the officer. "Yes, we want to press charges. And is there a way to keep her away from the house? I don't think it is safe for her to be here right now." "We can issue an emergency temporary restraining order," Miller nodded. "She won't be allowed within 500 feet of the property or either of you until the court hearing." "Do it," Thomas said. The words hit me harder than Lydia's slap had. My father was legally barring me from my childhood home. He was choosing the wolf over the shepherd. The drive to the station was a blur of streetlights and humiliation. When we arrived, the process was mechanical and dehumanizing. Fingerprints, mugshot, the confiscation of my shoelaces and belt. I sat in a holding cell that smelled of bleach and despair, staring at the concrete floor. When a detective finally came in to take my statement, I channeled every ounce of professional discipline I had left. "I am not signing that," I said, pointing to the pre-written summary he had drafted based on Lydia's frantic accusations. "I did not attack her. I did not threaten her with my vehicle. I will write my own statement." The detective shrugged, sliding a blank pad across the metal table. "Suit yourself, but the witness testimony is pretty damning." I wrote a sterile, factual account of the evening: argument regarding financial documents, verbal dispute, Mrs. Hargrove pulled the emergency brake, Mrs. Hargrove initiated physical contact, Mrs. Hargrove threw herself to the ground. It looked flimsy on paper. It looked like exactly what a guilty person would write to cover their tracks. "I want my phone call," I said, handing the pad back. I did not call my father. I called Ethan Morales. Ethan was a criminal defense attorney whose firm, Morales and Finch, had represented Blue Harbor Systems during a site negligence lawsuit last year. We had gone out for drinks a few times, strictly professional, but friendly enough that I had his personal cell number memorized. He picked up on the second ring. "Riley, it is Christmas Eve. Tell me you are calling to wish me a happy holiday, and not because a building fell down." "I am in jail." "Ethan," I said, my voice barely holding steady. "Riverton Precinct, assault and battery, domestic." The line went silent for a second. "I am on my way. Don't say another word to anyone, not even about the weather." Ethan arrived 40 minutes later, wearing a wool coat over pajamas, looking like an angel of mercy with a 5 o'clock shadow. He maneuvered through the bureaucracy with terrifying efficiency because I had no prior record, a steady job, and ties to the community. He managed to get me released on my own recognizance, pending an arraignment hearing after the holidays. We walked out into the freezing night air. My truck had been towed to the impound lot, leaving me shivering in my jacket on the sidewalk. "Okay," Ethan said, handing me a steaming cup of coffee he had miraculously procured. "Talk to me. The police report says you tried to run her over and then beat her in the driveway. Your dad corroborated it." "It is a lie," I said, the caffeine hitting my system like a jolt of electricity. "She staged it. She pulled the brake, dragged me out, hit me, and then took a dive when Dad came out." Ethan sighed, rubbing his face. "Riley, I believe you, but in domestic cases, the victim on the ground usually wins the narrative, especially with a witness. We need something concrete. Did the neighbors see the start of it? Is there a doorbell camera?" I shook my head. "Lydia installed cameras, but she controls the server. Even if they recorded it, she will delete the footage before we can subpoena it." "What about your phone?" Ethan asked. "Audio?" "I didn't have time," I said, frustration welling up. "It happened so fast. We were in the truck. She pulled the brake, and then—" I stopped. The memory replayed in my mind, slower this time. The screech of tires, the jarring stop, the engine rumbling, the dashboard lights flickering. I grabbed Ethan's arm. "The truck!" "What about it?" "The truck was running," I whispered, my eyes widening. "She pulled the emergency brake, but she didn't kill the ignition. The engine was idling the whole time." "Okay," Ethan said slowly. "I have a dashcam," I said, my voice rising with adrenaline. "A Blackview 4K. It is wired to the battery. It records on a loop, and it has a parking mode. But if the ignition was on, it was recording in full definition, audio and video." Ethan's eyes lit up. "Where was the fight?" "Directly in front of the grill," I said. "Dead center." "Get in the car," Ethan said, already moving toward his sedan. "We are going to the impound lot. Now." The impound lot was a desolate, fenced-in yard on the edge of town, guarded by a man named Earl, who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. It took 20 minutes of Ethan arguing legal precedent and threatening a court order before Earl finally grunted and buzzed us through the gate to retrieve personal property essential for defense. We found my Ford parked between a rusted sedan and a snowplow. It looked like a sleeping beast, covered in a fresh layer of snow. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped my keys twice before I could unlock the door. I scrambled into the driver's seat. The interior was freezing. I looked up. The little black cylinder was still there, mounted behind the mirror. The red light was off now. The battery had likely cut power after an hour of idling, but the SD card was slotted in the side. "Please," I whispered to the universe, "please let it be there." I popped the tiny card out and handed it to Ethan like it was a diamond. We didn't wait to get to a hotel. Ethan pulled a laptop out of his briefcase right there in the front seat of his car, with the heater blasting against the cold. He inserted the card into a reader and plugged it in. The folder structure appeared on the screen. He navigated to the folder dated today. There were dozens of files. He scrolled to the timestamp that matched the arrest report, around 3:30 in the afternoon. "This is it," he said, hovering the mouse over the file. "Ready?" "Play it." He clicked. The screen filled with the wide-angle view of my father's house. The image was crisp, despite the gray weather. We watched the truck jerk to a halt. We heard the screech of tires and the audio picked up clearly inside the cab. "Get out! I am not finishing this conversation in here." Lydia's voice was sharp, imperious. Then the doors opened. The audio shifted, picking up the wind and the deep rumble of the engine. We saw Lydia walk into the frame. We saw me step in. We listened to the screaming match. Every word I remembered was there, but hearing it played back was surreal. "You know about the shell company," my voice said on the recording. Then, the moment of truth. The camera caught Lydia's face perfectly as the realization hit her. It wasn't fear of violence, it was fear of exposure. We watched her lunge. The slap was loud, a sharp crack that made Ethan wince. We watched her claw at me, shoving me back until the hood of the truck and the camera shook from the impact of my body hitting it. And then, the part I hadn't even fully processed in the moment. Before she threw herself to the ground, Lydia leaned in close to me. Her face was inches from the grill, her features twisted into a sneer that looked demonic in high definition. "If you don't shut your mouth," she hissed, low and venomous, but perfectly captured by the microphone. "I will make your father fear you so much, he will write you out of existence. Watch me." Then, she looked toward the house, took a breath, and hurled herself backward onto the concrete, instantly switching to the high-pitched scream of a victim. Ethan hit the spacebar, freezing the video on Lydia's mid-air dive. The silence in the car was heavy, electric. "My God," Ethan breathed, letting out a laugh of pure disbelief. That is Hollywood level. She actually checked her landing spot." I stared at the screen, tears of relief finally spilling over. "It is all there. She threatened me. She admitted the manipulation." "This is not just evidence," Ethan said, a shark-like grin spreading across his face. "This is a nuclear bomb. This proves assault, filing a false police report. And if we dig into that shell company comment, probably fraud." "I need to show Dad," I said, reaching for my phone. "I need to send this to him right now." Ethan's hand shot out, covering mine. "No." I looked at him, confused. "What? Why? He needs to know he is sleeping next to a snake." "Riley, listen to me," Ethan said, his voice serious. "Your father is compromised. If you send this to him now, Lydia will spin it. She will say it is deepfake AI video. She will say you edited it. She will delete it from his phone before he even watches the whole thing. She has had weeks to poison his mind against you." "So what do we do?" I asked. "Let her win?" "No," Ethan said. "We let her think she has won. We let her proceed with the sale. We let her bring the lawyers into the room. We let her put her name on sworn legal documents." He ejected the SD card and held it up. "We wait until there are witnesses he can't ignore," Ethan continued. "We wait until the lawyers, the buyers, and the notary are all sitting at the same table, and then we play this, not on a phone screen, but on the biggest TV in the room." I looked at the frozen image of Lydia, the woman who had turned my father against me, who had slapped me and had me arrested on Christmas Eve. I thought about the Family Preservation Trust. I thought about the years of subtle insults. Ethan was right. A simple text message wasn't enough. She needed to be dismantled. "Okay," I said, wiping my eyes. "We do it your way." We drove to a cheap motel on the outskirts of Riverton. I didn't want to be anywhere near people I knew. Inside the room, we performed a ritual of data preservation. I uploaded the file to my encrypted cloud storage. I emailed a copy to Ethan's secure firm server. I copied the file onto an external hard drive I carried in my laptop bag. And finally, Ethan took a small, silver USB drive from his briefcase. We copied the file onto it. "This one goes in my office safe," he said, pocketing it. "This is the kill switch." I sat on the edge of the motel bed, watching the upload progress bar hit 100%. For the first time in hours, the shaking in my hands stopped. I was technically homeless for the holidays. I was facing criminal charges. My father thought I was a monster. But as I looked at that file name, Dashcam Incident Deck 24, MP4, I felt a strange sense of calm. I wasn't the victim anymore, I was the engineer. And I had just found the structural flaw that was going to bring the whole house down. The days following my arrest were a blur of cheap coffee, motel room fluorescent lighting, and a growing sense of claustrophobia. I was holed up in a room that smelled of lemon polish and stale cigarettes, forbidden by a temporary restraining order from going within 500 feet of the house I grew up in. My phone, however, was not restrained. Since I had blocked Lydia's number, she had taken to emailing me. The notifications pinged on my laptop with maddening regularity. Subject: A mother's prayer. Subject: We can fix this. Subject: Please, for your father's sake. I opened one from this morning, my stomach churning. Riley, it read, I know you are angry. I know you are confused. But watching your father cry last night broke my heart. We do not want to see you in jail. We do not want a criminal record to ruin your engineering career. I convinced Thomas to hold off on pressing for the maximum penalty, but you need to meet us halfway. If you agree to sign a waiver regarding the garage sale and accept the terms of the new will, showing us that you trust our judgment, we are willing to drop the charges. We can say it was a misunderstanding. Please, honey, let us be a family again. I spun the laptop around to face Ethan, who was sitting at the small round table eating a bagel. Read this, I said, my voice shaking with suppressed rage. Ethan scanned the text, his jaw tightening. Classic, he muttered, wiping crumbs from his mouth. This is not a peace offering, Riley. This is extortion. She is using the criminal justice system as leverage to force a civil contract. In legal terms, this is dangerously close to abuse of process. She wants me to sign away my rights to avoid jail, I said. She knows that if I have a violent record, I lose my security clearance for the government contracts at Blue Harbor. She is targeting my career. Exactly, Ethan said. Do not reply. Save every single one of these. We are building a file called coercion. If she was truly scared of you, she would not be negotiating financial terms. She would be hiding. I nodded, closing the email client. If she wants a financial war, I can fight that too. She forgot something important. What is that? I set up the garage's accounting system 4 years ago, I said, opening a new browser tab. And Dad never changes his passwords. He thinks Mustang 1969 is a master key. I logged into the cloud-based accounting platform for Tom's Corner Garage. My access was still valid. The dashboard loaded, showing a depressing red line on the cash flow chart. Okay, I muttered, my engineer brain taking over. Let us see where the money is bleeding. I pulled up the vendor list and the transaction history for the last 6 months. It took me less than 5 minutes to find the anomaly. Starting in August, there was a recurring monthly payment of $3,500, labeled Marketing and Business Strategy Consulting. The recipient was a vendor listed as CG Advisory, LLC. Ethan, I called out, does a 3-bay garage in Riverton need $42,000 a year in marketing consulting? Ethan pulled his chair over. Not unless they are buying Super Bowl ads. Who is CG Advisory? I clicked on the vendor details. The address was a PTO box in Tampa, Florida. Florida, I whispered. That is where Carissa lives. Check the corporate registry, Ethan commanded. I opened the Florida Division of Corporations website. It is public record. I typed in CG Advisory, LLC. The results popped up instantly. Date filed, July 12th of this year. Registered agent, Carissa Vance. Manager, Graham Miller. Carissa Vance, I read aloud. That is Lydia's daughter, and Graham is her live-in boyfriend. I met him once at a Thanksgiving dinner. He sells timeshares. So, Ethan said, leaning back and crossing his arms, Lydia is convincing your father that the business is failing, while simultaneously siphoning off the profit into a shell company owned by her daughter. She is starving the beast so she can justify selling it for parts. It gets worse, I said, clicking back to the garage's Documents tab. My father had a habit of scanning everything important and saving it there so he wouldn't lose the paper copies. It was a system I taught him. I scrolled through invoices and tax forms until I saw a PDF titled Policy Life/Update PDF, dated 6 months ago. I opened it. It was a term life insurance policy for Thomas Hargrove. My breath caught in my throat. $750,000. I read the coverage amount. Ethan, Dad used to have a $50,000 policy just to cover funeral expenses. Why would he sign this? I scrolled to the beneficiaries. Primary beneficiary, Lydia Hargrove, 100%. Contingent beneficiary, the Vance Family Trust. Me? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Where am I? You are not there, Ethan said softly. Usually, a spouse is primary, but children are contingent. She removed you entirely. And look at the date. This was signed 2 weeks after CG Advisory was formed. I sat back, feeling sick. The pieces were locking together like the steel frame of a skyscraper, but the shape they made was terrifying. This isn't just about the garage, I said, staring at the screen. Lydia doesn't just want the sale money. She wants the insurance money. That is over $1 million total. And for the insurance to pay out, Ethan said, his lawyer's voice turning dark. Thomas has to die. A cold chill swept through the motel room, far colder than the winter air outside. Do you think... I couldn't even finish the sentence. Do you think she would actually hurt him? Ethan stood up and paced the small room. People have done a lot more for a lot less than $1 million, Riley. But direct violence is messy. Lydia prefers manipulation, stress, neglect. If your father has a heart condition, which I recall you saying he does, she doesn't need a weapon. She just needs to crank up the pressure until he pops. Like having his daughter arrested for assaulting his wife. I realized with horror. The stress of this, the trial, the public shame, the family tearing apart, it could kill him. And if he drops dead of a heart attack next week, Ethan finished. Nobody asks questions. The grieving widow collects the check, sells the garage, and moves to Florida with her daughter. We need more, I said, grabbing my phone. The financial trail is good, but it is circumstantial. Dad will just say he approved the payments to help Carissa. He will say he signed the insurance because he loves Lydia. We need to prove intent. Ethan nodded. I know someone. She is expensive, but she is the best. Marla Jennings. Marla was a private investigator who looked like a librarian, but worked like a shark. We met her at a diner 2 towns over the next morning. She listened to our story, took the flash drive with the financial documents, and disappeared. For 48 hours, I paced the motel room. I watched the snow fall. I replayed the dashcam footage until I knew every pixel of Lydia's face. I imagined my father sitting in that house, surrounded by enemies he thought were his protectors. On the morning of the 3rd day, Marla sent an email to Ethan. It had no subject line, just an attachment labeled audio/extract CG VoIP. Ethan plugged his phone into the motel room's cheap speaker dock. Marla found something interesting, Ethan said. Carissa and Graham set up a VoIP phone system for their fake consulting company to look professional. It has a default setting that records all incoming client calls for quality assurance. They forgot to turn it off. And Lydia called it? Lydia called it... Ethan hit play. The audio was crystal clear. It was the digital hum of a recorded line. Hello? CG Advisory, a man's voice answered. Graham. Put Carissa on. Graham, it is urgent. Lydia's voice cut in. She sounded frantic but calculated. There was a shuffling sound. Then Carissa's voice. Mom? Why are you calling the business line? I told you. The cell reception is bad in the basement and I needed to talk away from Thomas. Lydia interrupted. Listen to me. The lawyer called. The arraignment is set for after New Year's. Is he still wavering? Carissa asked. He is a wreck, Lydia said, and there was a sneer in her voice that made my skin crawl. He has been clutching his chest all morning. I had to give him an extra nitroglycerin pill. Mom, Carissa sounded worried, but not for Thomas. If he kicks the bucket before he signs the sale papers, the deal falls through, right? Don't be stupid, Lydia snapped. If he dies, I inherit the business automatically. Then I sell it. It just takes longer for probate. Honestly, it might be cleaner. I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth. But won't people suspect something? Carissa asked. Please, Lydia scoffed. Everyone knows he has a bad heart. And now, everyone knows his psychotic daughter just attacked his wife. When people believe Riley is the villain, the story writes itself. Poor Thomas. The stress of his daughter's betrayal was just too much for his heart. Nobody will ask questions. They will just bring me casseroles and tell me how brave I am. The recording ended with a sharp click. Silence filled the motel room. It was heavy. Suffocating silence. I looked at Ethan. His face was pale. The cynical lawyer mask was gone, replaced by genuine horror. We have it, he whispered. Conspiracy to commit fraud. Endangerment. That is the smoking gun. I stood up. Walking to the window, I looked out at the parking lot, at the gray slush and the bleak sky. The fear I had felt for days was gone. The sadness was gone. In their place was a cold, iron resolve. She is counting on me being scared, I said, turning back to Ethan. She is counting on me hiding in this motel room, reading her emails, terrifying myself with what-ifs. She thinks she is writing the script, Ethan said, unplugging the phone. Then let's rewrite it, I said. You said we wait for the big meeting, the signing? Yes. When is it? Based on the emails and the timeline Lydia discussed, Ethan checked his notes. They are pushing to close on the 30th, 2 days from now. 2 days, I repeated. 2 days until she tries to sign his life away, and 2 days until we walk in there and burn her world to the ground. I picked up the laptop and looked at the accounting screen one last time. I looked at the insurance policy. I looked at the file Marla had sent. Get Marla ready, I said, and call the police detective who arrested me. Tell him he might want to be present for the negotiation meeting, not to arrest me, but because he is going to want to hear what a real crime sounds like. I wasn't just fighting for my inheritance anymore. I wasn't just fighting for my reputation. I was fighting for my father's life, and thanks to Lydia's arrogance and a cheap dashcam, I finally had the ammunition to win. The summons came on a Wednesday afternoon, delivered via a text message from my father that felt like it had been drafted by a committee. Riley, the message read, Lydia and I are hosting a small dinner tonight, a reconciliation meal. We want to put this ugly week behind us, sign the sale papers, and start the new year fresh. Please come. I just want everything to be normal again. I stared at the screen, feeling a familiar ache in my chest. Normal. For Thomas Hargrove, normal meant peace at any cost, even if the price was his own dignity. He didn't want the truth. He wanted the noise to stop. It is a trap, Ethan said, looking over my shoulder in the small office we had commandeered at his firm. She doesn't want reconciliation. She wants capitulation. She wants you in the room so she can gloat while your father signs the business away. I know, I said, putting the phone down on the desk. She probably invited the lawyers too. She wants witnesses to my surrender. Good, Ethan smiled, a sharp, predatory expression that made me glad he was on my side. Because that means we have an audience. This is the golden opportunity. Riley, we don't have to drag them to court to show them the evidence. We just have to walk through the front door. We spent the next 2 hours assembling the arsenal. Marla had overnighted a thick dossier of financial records. We had the printouts showing the ownership of CG Advisory, LLC. We had the bank statements highlighting the monthly drain of cash from the garage to Carissa's shell company. We had the life insurance policy with my name erased from existence. And sitting in the center of the desk like a silver bullet was the USB drive containing the dashcam footage and the audio recording of Lydia's phone call. Ready? Ethan asked, adjusting his tie. I stood up and smoothed the lapels of my black suit. I had ditched the jeans and work boots. Tonight, I wasn't the mechanic's daughter or the construction worker. I was dressed for a board meeting, or a funeral. Let's go, I said. We arrived at the house at 7 o'clock sharp. The driveway was crowded. I recognized the Lexus belonging to Mr. Lowell, Lydia's estate attorney, and a flashy sedan that likely belonged to the representative from Highway Crown Automotive. I parked my rental car on the street. My truck was still in the impound lot, and walked up the path with Ethan. When Lydia opened the door, her smile faltered for a fraction of a second when she saw Ethan. She was wearing a red velvet dress, looking festive and triumphant. "Riley," she said, recovering quickly. "And you brought a guest?" "This is Ethan," I said calmly, stepping past her into the foyer. "A close friend. I didn't think you would mind, given how many people you have invited to a family dinner." I gestured to the living room, where 3 men were standing with drinks in their hands. My father was there, looking uncomfortable in a stiff-collared shirt. He looked up when I entered, and the mix of relief and fear in his eyes was painful to witness. He wanted to hug me, I could tell, but he stayed rooted to the spot, glancing at Lydia for permission. "Mr. Hargrove." Ethan stepped forward, extending a hand. "Good to meet you. Riley has told me a lot about the garage." "Good to meet you," Dad mumbled, shaking the hand weakly. Lydia bustled in, linking her arm through Dad's. "Well, the more the merrier. Let me introduce everyone. This is Mr. Lowell, our family attorney, and this is Mr. Henderson from Highway Crown. They were kind enough to join us to help with the paperwork later." Mr. Henderson, a slick-looking man in a gray suit, nodded at me. "Big night for your folks, Ms. Hargrove. Smart move, selling at the top of the market." "We will see," I said neutrally. The dinner was a masterclass in psychological warfare. We sat around the dining table, the air thick with the smell of roast beef and tension. Lydia held court at the head of the table, playing the role of the benevolent matriarch to perfection. "I just want everyone to know," Lydia said, raising her wineglass, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, "that I hold no grudges. What happened in the driveway was traumatic. My hip is still bruised." She touched her side delicately, wincing for effect. "But I am a Christian woman. I believe in forgiveness. As long as Riley understands that this family needs to move forward with the new financial plan, I am willing to ask the police to drop the charges." She looked at the lawyers, ensuring they noted her generosity. "That is very big of you, Mrs. Hargrove." Mr. Lowell murmured. "I just want peace," Lydia sighed. "Thomas has been through enough. We need to sign these papers, secure our retirement, and just breathe." I cut a piece of meat, chewing slowly, under the table. My leg was bouncing with nervous energy, but my face remained impassive. "And the will?" I asked. "Is that part of the peace treaty too?" "It is just a safety measure, honey," Lydia said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Given your recent emotional outburst, we just want to make sure the family assets are managed responsibly. It is for your own good." My father stared at his plate. "Riley," he said softly, his voice raspy, "please, let's just get through tonight." "Okay, Dad," I said. "Let's get through tonight." Once the plates were cleared, the mood shifted instantly from social to transactional. Mr. Henderson opened his briefcase and spread a series of thick documents across the mahogany coffee table in the living room. Mr. Lowell produced a separate folder, the updated will. "All right," Henderson said, uncapping a fountain pen. "We have the purchase agreement here, $350,000, transfer of deed, and the employment contract for Mr. Hargrove. Standard terms." Lydia was practically vibrating with anticipation. She picked up the pen and tried to hand it to Thomas. "Here, darling, sign right here." Thomas took the pen. His hand was shaking. He looked at the paper, then at me. "Dad," I said. "Don't start, Riley," Lydia snapped, her mask slipping. "He is signing it." "Actually," Ethan spoke up. His voice was calm, authoritative, and loud enough to cut through the room. Before anyone signs a legally binding document involving the transfer of significant assets, I think there is a piece of due diligence we need to address. Mr. Lowell looked at Ethan over his glasses. I am sorry. Are you representing Ms. Hargrove? This is a private family matter. I am an attorney, Ethan said, dropping the friend charade. But tonight, I am just a concerned party with some information that Mr. Henderson and Mr. Lowell, and certainly Mr. Hargrove, need to see. We don't have time for this, Lydia hissed, moving between Ethan and Thomas. Thomas, sign the paper. It concerns the liability of the sale, Ethan said, looking directly at the Highway Crown representative. Mr. Henderson, if you purchase a company that has been systematically defrauded by its management, that liability transfers to you. I assume you would want to know if the books were cooked? Henderson froze. Excuse me? Defrauded? That is a lie, Lydia shrieked. This is harassment. Get out of my house. If it is a lie, I said, standing up and buttoning my jacket, then you won't mind if we watch a short video. I pulled the silver USB drive from my pocket. It caught the light of the chandelier. What is that? Dad asked, his eyes wide. It is the truth, Dad, I said. About the driveway, about the money, about everything. Lydia lunged for me, actually reaching out to grab the drive. But Ethan stepped in her path, a solid wall of wool and muscle. Don't touch her, Ethan said, his voice low and dangerous. Sit down, Mrs. Hargrove. This is illegal, Lydia shouted, turning to her lawyer. Do something! They are recording us! Mr. Lowell looked from his hysterical client to the calm, suited man standing next to me. He was a seasoned attorney. He knew the smell of a losing battle. Lydia, he said cautiously, if they have evidence relevant to the estate or the business, we have a duty to examine it. If we suppress it, and it comes out later. There is nothing to see, she screamed. Then you have nothing to fear, I said. I walked over to the 60-inch flat-screen television mounted above the fireplace, the one Lydia had bought with the money I gave Dad for the roof. I reached around the back and found the USB port. My hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of the moment. I was about to detonate a bomb in the middle of my living room. I plugged it in. The TV screen flickered, switching from the cable input to the media menu. The room went deadly silent. Thomas stood in the center of the rug, the pen still dangling from his fingers. He looked small, confused, and terrified. On one side of him stood Lydia, her chest heaving, her face a mask of panic. On the other side stood me and Ethan, and on the sofas, the lawyers and the corporate rep sat like a reluctant jury, their eyes glued to the screen. Dad, I said, picking up the remote control. You promised me you wanted everything to be normal. You wanted the truth. I navigated to the file named Dashcam Incident Dec 24.mp4. Watch closely, I said. I pressed play. The 60-inch television screen flickered, casting a harsh blue-white light over the darkened living room. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of heavy, pressurized silence you feel in a building just before the demolition charges detonate. On the screen, the wide-angle lens of my dashcam displayed the gray winter afternoon in high definition. The audio was crisp, picking up the crunch of gravel and the low rumble of the idling diesel engine. We watched as the digital version of Lydia threw open the passenger door and marched around to the front of the truck. Get out, the recorded Lydia screamed. I am not finishing this conversation in here. In the living room, the real Lydia let out a nervous, high-pitched laugh. Oh, for heaven's sake, she said, waving a hand dismissively at Mr. Henderson and Mr. Lowell. This is ridiculous. She probably edited this on her computer. You know what AI can do these days. It is a deepfake. It is a raw MP4 file, Ethan said, his voice cutting through her deflection like a razor. The metadata is embedded, the timestamp, the GPS coordinates, the encoding signature. It has all been verified by a forensic digital expert. Keep watching. On the screen, the argument escalated. We watched as Lydia's face twisted into a mask of pure malice. We heard every insult she hurled about my job, my lack of a husband, and my supposed jealousy of Carissa. Then came the moment that made my father flinch. The on-screen Lydia stepped close to the grill of the truck. Her voice dropped to that venomous hiss we had heard in the car, but here, amplified by the expensive surround sound system she had bought, it filled the room. "If you don't shut your mouth, I will make your father fear you so much he will write you out of existence. Watch me." I looked at my father. Thomas was gripping the arms of his chair so hard his knuckles were white. His face had drained of all color, leaving him looking gray and sickly. He stared at the woman on the screen, then slowly turned his head to look at the woman standing next to him. "Lydia?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "It is taken out of context," Lydia stammered, backing away slightly. "I was angry. She provoked me." "Keep watching," I said softly. The violence happened fast. The slap cracked like a whip through the speakers. We saw my head snap back. We saw Lydia lunge, clawing, shoving me until my body slammed against the hood of the truck, shaking the camera frame. Mr. Lowell, the family attorney, took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Mr. Henderson, the corporate buyer, looked physically ill. They were witnessing a felony assault, clear as day. And then, the finale. We watched Lydia look toward the house. We watched her take a breath, check her footing, and then deliberately throw herself backward onto the concrete. We watched her scramble away from the truck, ruffle her own hair to look disheveled, and start screaming for help before my father even opened the front door. "Con bé ding tong se vào am?" the recorded Lydia wailed. "No, wait," she screamed in English. "She tried to run me over. Help me." The video froze there, paused by my hand on the remote. The image of Lydia, fake crying on the ground while I stood bewildered by the truck, burned into the screen. "That," Ethan said into the stunned silence, "is what filing a false police report looks like, and that is what perjury looks like." Lydia was shaking now, but not from fear, from fury. "You set me up," she hissed at me. "You parked there on purpose." "I parked there because you pulled the emergency brake," I replied calmly. Ethan stepped forward, connecting his laptop to the TV's HDMI cable, replacing the dashcam footage with a spreadsheet. "But the assault was just the distraction," Ethan said, addressing the lawyers now. "The real magic trick was happening in the bank accounts." "What is this?" Miss Henderson asked, leaning forward. "This," Ethan pointed to the screen, "is a flow of funds analysis. Mr. Hargrove, you believe you have been paying a firm called CG Advisory for marketing services, $3,500 a month." "Yes," my father croaked. "Lydia said they were optimizing our web presence." "CG Advisory does not exist as a marketing firm," Ethan explained, clicking to the next slide which showed the Florida Corporate Registry. "It is a shell company. The registered agent is Carissa Vance, and the manager is Graham Miller." "Carissa?" Thomas blinked, confusion warring with heartbreak. "But she is a marketing executive." "She is the recipient of your money, Dad," I said gently. "There was no marketing. They were just draining the garage's accounts to lower its value, making you desperate to sell, while pocketing the difference." "And finally," Ethan said, his voice turning grave, "we have the matter of the insurance." He clicked a button, and the video call window opened. Marla Jennings, the private investigator, appeared on the screen. She was sitting in her office, a headset on. "Good evening," Marla said, her voice professional and sharp. "I am Marla Jennings, licensed private investigator. I was retained to look into the anomaly regarding Mr. Hargrove's life insurance policy update from 6 months ago." Mr. Lowell sat up straighter. "What anomaly?" "The beneficiary change," Marla said, "removing the biological child and assigning 100% to the spouse, with a secondary trust controlled by the spouse's daughter. That is unusual but legal. However, when combined with this audio recording obtained from the CG Advisory VoIP server, it suggests a more specific intent." "Audio?" Lydia breathed, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. Marla played the clip. The room filled with the sound of the digital phone line. We heard Lydia's voice, clear and distinct. When people believe Riley is the villain, the story writes itself. Poor Thomas, the stress of his daughter's betrayal was just too much for his heart. Nobody will ask questions. The silence that followed this time was different. It wasn't the silence of shock, it was the silence of horror. My father slowly stood up. He looked unsteady, swaying slightly on his feet. He looked at the insurance document displayed on the screen, the policy that was worth more dead than alive. He looked at the transcript of the call where his wife discussed his death as a convenient administrative hurdle. "Stress," Thomas whispered. "You said the stress would kill me." "Thomas, no!" Lydia ran toward him, reaching for his arm. "It was just talk. I was venting. You know how I get when I'm frustrated." Thomas recoiled from her touch, as if she were made of burning iron. He stumbled back, crashing into the side table, knocking over a lamp. "Don't touch me," he gasped. You were waiting for it." "No!" Lydia screamed, tears streaming down her face. Real tears this time. Tears of a gambler who had lost everything. "I love you. I did this for us. So we could retire. So we could have the lake house." "You didn't want a lake house with me," Thomas said, his voice gaining strength, shaking with a mix of rage and profound sorrow. "You wanted a funeral. You wanted the money." "Mr. Henderson stood up abruptly, snapping his briefcase shut. The sound was like a gavel striking a block. "Mr. Hargrove," Henderson said, his voice tight. "Highway Crown Automotive is withdrawing our offer immediately. We cannot be associated with this. Our legal team will be in touch regarding the return of our deposit, and we will be reviewing the negotiation process for potential fraud." He looked at Lydia with pure disgust. "Brand image consultant? I don't think so." Henderson walked out the front door without another word. Mr. Lowell, Lydia's lawyer, was packing his papers with frantic speed. "Mrs. Hargrove, I must inform you that I can no longer represent you. This evidence presents a conflict of interest and potential criminal liability that goes far beyond my scope as an estate attorney." "You can't leave me!" Lydia shrieked, grabbing his sleeve. "You are my lawyer!" "I am an officer of the court," Lowell said, pulling his arm free, "and I advise you to remain silent." He hurried out after Henderson, leaving the front door wide open, letting the freezing winter wind swirl into the hallway. Lydia stood alone in the center of the room. The board meeting was over. The guests were gone. The money was gone. She turned to Thomas, her face a ruin of smeared mascara and desperation. She tried one last Hail Mary. "Thomas, please," she begged, dropping to her knees. "It is me, your Liddy. They are twisting everything. Riley is jealous. She has always hated me. She manipulated the video. She hacked the phone. You know I would never hurt you. I take care of you. Who reminds you to take your pills? Who cooks for you?" Thomas looked down at her. For a moment, I was terrified he would cave. I was terrified that the years of conditioning were too strong. But then he looked at the TV screen, where the paused image of his wife lying on the ground, framing his daughter, was still visible. He looked at me, standing there in my suit, the daughter who had paid his rent, fixed his shop, and now saved his life. He took a deep breath, and his posture changed. The slump was gone. He stood tall, like the man he used to be before she started carving away his confidence. "My pills," Thomas said quietly. "I wonder, were those even the right pills?" Lydia froze. Thomas walked over to the side table where the landline phone sat. He picked up the receiver. His hand was steady now. "Thomas?" Lydia whispered. "What are you doing?" He didn't look at her. He looked straight ahead, staring at the wall, his eyes hard and cold. "Call the police," he said to the room, but he was speaking to me. "I want to file a report." "For the assault?" I asked softly. "For everything," Thomas said, his voice echoing in the empty room. False reporting, fraud, attempted, whatever this was, I want her out of my house. I want her out of my life. He turned to Lydia, and the look on his face was one of absolute finality. If that dashcam hadn't been there, he said, his voice breaking slightly, my daughter would be in jail. She would have a record for the rest of her life, and I probably wouldn't be here next Christmas to apologize to her. Lydia slumped onto the carpet, burying her face in her hands, her sobs echoing in the silence, but this time, nobody moved to comfort her. I pulled my phone out and dialed 911. Riverton emergency, the dispatcher answered. I need an officer at 402 Maple Avenue, I said, my voice steady. We have a confession, and we have video evidence of a crime. I looked at my father. He nodded at me, a single, solemn nod. We were on the same side again. The nightmare was over. The air in the Riverton County Courthouse tasted like floor wax and anxiety. It was 3 weeks after the disastrous dinner party, and the winter sky outside was a brilliant, unforgiving blue. I sat at the defense table, but for the first time since this nightmare began, my hands were not shaking. Next to me, Ethan sat with the relaxed posture of a man who knows he is holding a royal flush. Across the aisle, the prosecutor looked tired. The seat where Lydia should have been, if she were the victim she claimed to be, was empty. She had been advised by her new public defender not to attend the hearing, given the shifting tides of the investigation. Your Honor, the prosecutor said, standing up and buttoning his jacket, in light of the digital evidence submitted by the defense, specifically the dashcam video labeled Exhibit A and the audio recordings labeled Exhibit B, the state moves to dismiss all charges against Riley Hargrove with prejudice. The judge, a stern woman with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, nodded. Granted. And regarding the cross-complaint? We are opening an active investigation into Lydia Hargrove, the prosecutor continued, his voice echoing in the high-ceilinged room. The charges under consideration include filing a false police report, perjury, and abuse of process. Additionally, based on the financial documents provided, we are coordinating with the Fraud Division to investigate the relationship between Mrs. Hargrove, the entity known as CG Advisory, and the life insurance policy taken out on Thomas Hargrove. A murmur ran through the small gallery. My father was sitting in the front row. He looked older than he had 3 weeks ago. The gray in his beard seemed to have spread, and his shoulders were slumped under the weight of a reality he could no longer deny. Mr. Hargrove, the judge addressed him, do you wish to make a statement? Thomas stood up. He gripped the wooden railing in front of him as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. He cleared his throat, but the sound was weak. He looked at the judge, and then he turned his body to face me. I do, Your Honor, he said. His voice cracked, but he forced himself to continue. I want to apologize to my daughter. The room went silent. I felt a lump form in my throat, hard and painful. I spent 40 years fixing cars, my father said, looking directly into my eyes. I thought I knew how to look under the hood and see what was broken, but when it came to my own house, I was blind. I believed what was easy to believe. It was easier to think my daughter was jealous than to admit my wife was a con artist. It was easier to listen to sweet lies than to face the hard truth. He took a breath, his hands trembling on the rail. I let a stranger come between us because she flattered me, he continued. And I almost let that stranger destroy my daughter's life because I was too weak to ask the right questions. I am sorry. Riley, I failed you as a father. I failed you as a protector. And I thank God every day that you were smart enough to have that camera, because if you had relied on my judgment alone, I would have sent you to prison. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep my composure. It was the apology I had wanted for years, but hearing it out loud, in open court, was devastating. It was the sound of a man's ego shattering. The judge let the silence hang for a moment before turning to me. Ms. Hargrove, she said gently, do you wish to seek civil damages against Lydia Hargrove for the assault or the false imprisonment? I looked at the empty space where Lydia would have sat. I thought about the money she had siphoned. I thought about the bruise on my face that had finally faded. "No, Your Honor," I said, standing up. "I don't want her money. I doubt she has any left after the investigation into the shell company is finished. I just want the court to ensure she has no legal standing in my father's life anymore. I want a permanent order barring her from any financial or medical decision-making power regarding Thomas Hargrove. As for my reputation, the video has already done the work of restoring that." "So ordered," the judge said, banging the gavel. "The temporary restraining order against Lydia Hargrove and Carissa Vance is made permanent. They are to have no contact with you or your father. I strongly suggest, Mr. Hargrove, that you retain independent counsel to audit your entire estate." "I already have, Your Honor," Thomas whispered. When we walked out of the courtroom, the winter sun hit us with blinding intensity. Thomas was waiting for me near the bottom of the marble steps. He looked like a man who had just survived a shipwreck, wet, cold, and grateful to be on solid ground, even if he had lost everything else. He took a step toward me, then hesitated, unsure if he was allowed to close the distance. "Riley," he said, "I spoke to a new lawyer yesterday, a guy Ethan recommended. We tore up the draft of that will. The old one, the one from before Lydia, is back in effect, but we are going to write a new one, a clean one." "That is good, Dad," I said, shifting my bag on my shoulder. "I want to sit down with you," he said, his eyes pleading. "Next week, with the lawyer. I want you to see everything, the accounts, the debts, the insurance, no more secrets. I want you to help me plan the future, not as a guest, but as a partner." I looked at him. I loved him. He was my dad. But the scar from the handcuffs was still fresh on my wrists, and the memory of him standing on the porch with Lydia while the police took me away was not something that would vanish with a single apology. "I will come to the meeting," I said. "But Dad, you need to understand something. This is not just about paperwork. You looked at me, your own daughter, and you saw a criminal because it was convenient. You need to fix the part of you that was willing to throw me away." He flinched, but he nodded. I know I broke something. "I think we should go to therapy," I said bluntly. "Family counseling, real counseling, not just chatting over dinner." "Okay," he said immediately. "Anything. I will do anything." "And Lydia is never to be mentioned," I added. "She is gone, if you bring her up, or if you try to justify what she did. I walk out." "She is gone," Thomas vowed. "I promise." The fallout for Lydia was swift and brutal. The dashcam footage, or at least the part where she threw herself onto the driveway, had leaked. I never asked who did it, but I suspected someone at the police station had a sense of poetic justice. It went viral on the local community pages. The title was simple: The Flop. In a small town like Riverton, shame is a currency, and Lydia was bankrupt. She was fired from the salon where she had tried to get her old job back. The investigation into CG Advisory led the authorities to Carissa and Graham in Florida. Last I heard, they were facing federal wire fraud charges for the interstate transfer of stolen funds. The consulting empire had crumbled the moment the sunlight hit it. 2 days later, I was back in my truck, heading toward a new project site in Cincinnati. The morning was crisp. I climbed into the cab and turned the ignition key. The diesel engine roared to life, a familiar, comforting sound. My eyes drifted up to the rear-view mirror. Behind it, the small black cylinder of the dashcam came to life. Recording. The red light began its rhythmic blink. Blink, blink, blink. For years, I had treated it as a piece of safety equipment, like a hard hat or steel-toed boots. I thought it was there to protect me from bad drivers or insurance scammers. I never realized it was actually a guardian of my reality. It was the only witness that couldn't be manipulated, gaslit, or charmed. It simply saw what was. I pulled out of my apartment complex, merging onto the highway. I felt lighter than I had in years. The heavy cloak of suspicion that Lydia had draped over me was gone. I wasn't the jealous stepdaughter. I wasn't the failure. I was the one who had seen the truth when everyone else was blind. That weekend, I drove down to Riverton. I pulled into the gravel driveway of the garage. It looked different. The ferns were gone from the waiting room window. The pretension was stripped away. It looked like a garage again. I found my father outside, standing on a ladder. He was holding a can of white paint and a scraper. He was meticulously peeling off the vinyl sticker that Lydia had forced him to put up. The sleek, soulless logo of Highway Crown Automotive. Underneath, the faded hand-painted letters of Tom's Corner Garage were beginning to emerge. He heard my truck and turned. He climbed down slowly, wiping his hands on a rag. He looked tired, but his eyes were clear. "Hey," he said. "Hey," I replied, slamming the truck door. "You missed a spot." He chuckled, a dry sound, but genuine. "I am getting there. It takes a lot of scraping to get this adhesive off. It is stubborn." "Corporate glue usually is," I said. He looked at the sign, then at the paint can. He picked up a second brush from the tray and held it out to me. "I was thinking," he said, his voice hesitant. "Maybe we don't just repaint it. Maybe we change the name. Hargrove and Daughter? Or just Hargroves?" I looked at the brush. It was dripping with fresh, clean white paint. "I am not a mechanic, Dad," I said. "I build buildings." "I know," he said. "But you saved this building. You own it as much as I do. More, probably." He stepped closer, pressing the handle of the brush into my hand. "From now on," Thomas said, "if I make a decision about this place, or about money, or about anything big, I ask you first. We run it by you, and we let that camera of yours watch us do it, just in case I get stupid again." I wrapped my fingers around the wood handle. It felt solid. "Deal," I said. I stepped up to the wall beside him. We stood shoulder to shoulder, painting over the mistakes of the past, covering the corporate blue with clean, honest white. For the first time in a decade, I didn't feel like I was standing on the opposite side of a battle line. I was standing right beside him, and up in the driveway, parked perfectly straight, the dashcam watched us, its unblinking red eye recording a new beginning. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from your car, your office, or maybe while working in the garage like Thomas? Please drop a comment below and let me know your location and what you thought of Riley's Revenge. If you enjoyed seeing the truth come to light, please make sure to subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this story get recommended to more people who need a little justice in their lives.